Hello, everyone. Today on the Doctor Who Guide, I am super excited to be joined by an amazing fellow writer in the 1997 annual. Andrew, welcome. Let me know how you doing today. What's the weather
I'm
like? Where are you from in the UK?
I'm from Coventry in the West Midlands, and the weather here it was sunny earlier, but now the dark clouds have come over, a little bit of rain in the air, so it's not fantastic. It's not the sort of day you want to be going out for walks and you just want to be sitting in by the fire doing
Lovely.
nothing.
Lovely, lovely. Well, that's the perfect day for an interview.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you don't want to be stuck inside while the sun is shining, right? Andrew McDonald has written two short stories in the 1997 annual by Terraquis Distributors. The first is called Shiver and has illustrations by Paul McCaffrey. The second is called The Worry and has illustrations by Andrew Parsons. Tell me where I can find you on social media. We'll pop those links in the description down below, but let me know where I can find you online.
okay. Well, I have my Facebook account. That's Andrew McDonald. I also have an author, which I post about my other books, the other work that I've done. That's Andrew J. McDonald. And you can also find me on Instagram. And hopefully I should be able to link my Amazon shop to my Instagram account if I can manage to work that out.
Brilliant, brilliant. So you have in the 1997 annual, which I have just here, I have one of the covers right here. You have two short stories, one of which was illustrated by another Andrew, who I've had the pleasure of interviewing, Andrew
Yes.
Parsons. So if you could give me just two short little spoiler-free descriptions of your stories. So let's start with the Shiver if you were to pitch it to somebody who's never read it before.
Shiver is about a tower block full of normal people, everyday people you'd see on the street, but there is a creature living in the tower block that whenever it appears, the temperature drops, everyone goes cold, and the creature appears it appears for dinner, really. That's all it's there for, just to eat. And it's just surviving. That's basically Shiver.
Right, right. It's one of those things that Doctor Who does best is takes an everyday normal thing like blinking, for instance, and
Yeah.
makes you equate it with a Doctor Who monster. I mean, how many times have we had an inexplicable shiver? Like there are goosebumps and shivers that come from the cold, but I also feel like inexplicable shivers could be a weeping angel passing by, or a you know
Well, yeah. I mean,
a
the idea for the Shiver was every time, like you say, every now and again your temperature will drop. You look around, something just happened, somebody just walked here. I don't know what's going on, and you don't know what's happening. And this in the tower block, this is happening to the residents. So every time the temperature drops, they feel cold. They know there's something near, but no one believes them apart from anyone living in the tower block. So it's a mixture of a demon and a monster sort of rolled into one to plague the people in this tower block.
Exactly, exactly. I love both of your stories in the annual. The other one is called The Worry. So if you could pitch that for us too, you did a wonderful job with the Shiver. So please let us know about The Worry.
The Worries, a World War I story. And I mean, the inspiration for it was documentaries I watched about gas attacks and the horrors of the whole um, the gas situation and how they used to fight. And the thought was, what if there was a cloud going over the battlefields and it was just sucking up rather than killing people, it was just feeding our emotions and leaving everybody with a worry. That's where that stems from, and that's where the story was born, and that's what the story's about. It's a gas cloud feeding off people's emotions.
I felt like I could really see some kindred spirits and some great episodes of Doctor Who relating to your stories, because that's sort of one of the questions I'll ask is, what if you had to describe your story using an existing Doctor Who story to give us the vibe of it, what one would you choose? And so I definitely felt like the beginning of Genesis of the Daleks was a kindred spirit with the Worry. I half expected a Time Lord to pop out of the fog and say, "Doctor, we're sending you on another mission," and of course with the tower block and a monster in the residence, I saw a lot of a kindred spirit in Paradise Towers
Yes.
with
Yeah.
Shiver, and so it's wonderful, and of course you had again to take on these lovely characters of Stacey and Sard, who are just celebrated by this annual, which links to order this are in the description down below. This is the alternate cover illustrated by Chris, who is the artist who illustrated my story, The Edge of Oblivion. And it just celebrates both of those characters so wonderfully. But there are some certain challenges with having an ice warrior as a companion, and not just having everybody run screaming from the sight of a giant,
Yeah.
8 foot tall alien lizard. And so I found that there were some great ways in which in both The Worry and Shiver that they addressed the appearance of a gigantic lizard. We've all
Yeah.
had to dress him up in various different ways. And so I wanted to ask you about your background for a second, because it is beautiful. I am just so in awe of, you've got DVDs. I see you've got figurines, action figures. Is that a Yeti from, that little symbol from like
Yes.
the Web of Fear and the Abominable Snowman?
Yes. The little locust. Yes.
Oh
Yeti.
my goodness, that's amazing.
Metebelis crystal. So lots of
Amazing.
different things, and of course my teddy bears.
Oh, that's adorable.
Yeah, there's quite a few of
Look
them.
at them. Oh my gosh.
There is 6 of them in total.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so I've got lots of things. I mean, I've got all my DVDs. I've got my collection of books, reference books, novels. This isn't my whole collection. A lot of it is downstairs because I literally just hibernate. Whenever I'm writing, this is my room, my space. I'm surrounded by my Doctor Who item, my memorabilia. But I've got a lot more downstairs, hidden away, that I've just run out of space to put things. So
Right?
these are my favorite toys.
Amazing. I mean, all of us need shelves that are bigger on the inside, right? So one thing
Definitely.
we're all running out of space. So talk to me a little bit about your writing process. You mentioned being in that room surrounded by Doctor Who stuff. It must be nice to have that inspiration around you for specifically Doctor Who things, but just writing in general. We have I think a lot of Doctor Who fans got into creative careers because of being inspired by Doctor Who, but also the behind the scenes and such. Was that the case for you? Was Doctor Who, did that play a part in making you want to be a writer or a creative, or was there some other inspiration there?
Oh, definitely, Doctor Who. I mean, everything. Whereas I know people out have grown up with me, they wanted to appear on the program, and I want to be the Doctor, and I want to be a monster. I never had any of that. My goal was always to write, and it still is. My biggest ambition would be now to write for TV. That's what I would one day like to do. I'd like to one day, Russell T Davies will give me a phone call, say, Andrew, come down to Cardiff. I want you to make an episode. That would be my dream come true. And it started because it was for me when I was a child. Doctor Who was an escape for me. It was a way out. Followed that way out, and it was a whole new world. Here was this hero that we had who didn't carry a gun. He wasn't a Superman. He wasn't might. All he used was his mind to get out of certain situations, and that was like a breath of fresh air to not just science fiction in general, but to TV as a whole. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to write for that. I wanted to inspire people. I wanted to teach people, because that's what a lot of Doctor Who was about. It isn't just about entertaining. It's also about teaching morals, standards, history, all these science, all these different little things that you just take for granted now. So for me, I started writing little short stories way back, probably at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, just for my pleasure. One part, 4-part stories that was never intended anybody to ever see. And if I've ever found them, they were probably quite bad, if I'm honest. But I regenerated doctors. I killed off companions. I was a showrunner on my own series. And then it just grew from there. And I started writing short stories for my children when they were little, not Doctor Who related. These were like silly little things like Schnitzel, the German Shepherd, who couldn't talk English. So little things to keep them amused. And then I got put on the back burner as life took over, mortgage, job, bills. And then it wasn't until a few years ago I actually started writing again. I had this great idea that I was going to write this book, and all these publishers was going to fall over themselves, and oh yeah, so I done it, and it still remains unpublished to this day. And it was a massive, it was a beast to write. The unofficial history of UNIT, literally everything I could have found, TV, comics, audio, new adventure books, everything got put into this book. It was the history of UNIT, history of weaponry, bases, uniform, all in one place. And it went right up. Last time it got updated was when Dark Water was on TV.
Wow.
So it's if I ever wanted to go back to it, I've got quite a bit to catch up on. But that's where then I moved away from Doctor Who and started releasing my own self-published novels. And then the Terrestrius stuff came up, and I moved back into Doctor Who. And 11 stories down, still going strong.
That's amazing. That's amazing. What an incredible journey from, being inspired by Doctor Who at a young age, and your journey through writing that unit book sounds amazing. I would totally buy that. Oh my gosh, if it was available, that's so cool. And then, all the way up to Dark Water, that's still a lot to write about. That's incredible. Well done.
I mean, I did toy with the idea of self-publishing it, but I wanted it illustrated. I had these big ideas of it having illustrations, and I never felt just the words would do it justice. So that's why it's sitting in files on my PC, still unpublished, just waiting for the day.
Well, there's a lot of Doctor Who artists out there. So if you are a Doctor Who artist out there, you'll know how to contact Andrew. And I mean, as we looked at this annual, there is so much incredible writing, but there's an equal amount of it is just beautiful, beautiful illustrations by a whole host of Doctor Who fans. What was it like seeing the illustrations for both of your stories for the first time? Was it just like all of a sudden you get an email, these are what the illustrations look like, or did you get to work with any of the artists as they illustrated your stories? Did you find out when you got the book?
A lot of the time, find out when I get the book. A couple of times I have had Mark sending me pictures, and absolutely, I mean, some of the artists, well, all of the artists that have worked on my stories have absolutely blown me away. And I've looked at every single one of them and thought how talented these people are to not just take the words that I've wrote, but create them so the story comes to life in front of you. I mean, the images for the two stories in the book, Shiver and The Worry, are absolutely amazing. For the Worry, the atmosphere, you can feel the atmosphere brought through in the images. You can actually feel as though you're stepping into a World War I battlefield. The colors, it's just fantastic. And then you look at Shiver, and again, they're very striking pictures. There's an image, the image at the beginning looks quite innocent enough, where he's standing and he's looking at the ball of wool. But when you read the story, and there's a very, and it's a lovely piece of artwork.
It absolutely is, and I can pull it up here. And that's the thing, is it's almost like yeah, there we go. Brilliant, brilliant.
You look at the different contrasts of the colors as well. It is very vivid and very striking.
It
and
is.
Like I said, the artists are absolutely brilliant. The ones that have, well, not just the ones that have worked on my story. As a whole, they are very talented throughout all of the books.
Right. I mean, I was absolutely just blown away by how many artists we had working on the story. This is incredible artwork here.
Yeah, I mean, that invokes straight away the whole World War I vibe. You can see, you can feel how depressive the whole situation that they would have been in during that time period.
Absolutely. And the original annuals, the official annuals, they used artwork to such brilliant extents. And I love that we're taking that forward with these two stories. I mean, both of your stories, they kind of bookend the annual in some very cool ways, and I think that's really special. The two stories just take you on a journey, also not only with Stacy and Sard, but also with the Eighth Doctor. So, what was it like for your process writing for the Eighth Doctor, and kind of, who was the Doctor for you growing up that you most felt attached to?
My Doctor is Tom Baker. Even though the very first story I saw, Death to the Daleks with John Pertwee, Tom Baker, 7 years he was the Doctor for, and so I grew up with mainly him as my Doctor. But Terence Dicks once said, the Doctor is essentially one character. So when you come to write for the Doctor, you're writing for, and I do agree with him, you are writing for one character. You've just got, each actor had their different little mannerisms he plays on it. And I found writing for Paul McGann is quite easy because he's got less of a canvas to follow. You've really got the TV movie, and you follow on from that. If you're not familiar with the Big Finish audios, that's the only point of reference you have. So from the movie, I always found him to be quite innocent. He had this youthful enthusiasm about him. So, and that's what I tried to capture in the two stories for the annual. And it was really fun to write for.
Absolutely. I mean, the TV movie, I think, is obviously something that I think so many of us turned back to as when we were going to, set our minds on how we wanted to write the Eighth Doctor. But as you say, I mean, it's sort of like variations on a theme. The theme is still the same, but each, actor and each writer by extension is adding their own little melody to it, but it's still the same throughout. And so, I totally resonate with that. I wanted to sort of dive into some of the references that I caught in your short stories that, you know, they're references. So these won't spoil the stories, but I did want to just say, compare notes here. At one point, you in Shiver, you mentioned the uh, Bayal Foundation, which I thought was a very clever
Yes.
reference because the Bayal Foundation, also known as the Center for Alien Biomorphology, was a medical facility existing in the 50th century on the small Sol system asteroid K4067 from the TV story, The Invisible Enemy. That's the description from the TARDIS wiki. And so I thought to myself, when I heard it, I was like, Bayal Foundation, that's familiar, that's familiar. And so I went to the TARDIS wiki and I searched it up. I was like, oh my gosh, that's a reference, which is amazing. And I'd like to think helps me sort of date your story as being before the year 5000, but not too far off of that. So I just wanted to say, well done. I see that.
Thank you.
um,
It's a nice nod because when I wrote Shiver, and when it got to that certain scene where they had to go to, even though the main bulk of the story is very much rooted in the 90s, they needed a facility far in the future. And obviously, being a 97 annual, you couldn't use New Earth as a reference point. So the perfect one was going back to The Invisible Enemy. And if people haven't watched The Invisible Enemy, I would definitely recommend it. It's not as
Absolutely.
bad as it's not as bad as you heard it may be. Some of the effects aren't great, but as a story, it is a very good story.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing too is, yeah, as each of these, lovely Blu-ray box sets comes out, we have actually season 15 coming up very soon at the time of filming. And I think that's been a really wonderful thing is that because they're not just individual episodes, they're a full season, that it's allowed people to revisit stories that you might not tend to pick up off the shelf necessarily. And so I love that because I mean, how many Doctor Who fans have had conversations going, it's not as bad as people say it is. It's brilliant if you just look at it this way. And so absolutely, definitely watch that. You also mentioned the Crab Nebula, which is an actual thing, but also is an in-universe Doctor Who thing. The Crab Nebula was a nebula outside of the Milky Way galaxy. Doctor Who described it as an entirely new universe compared to the Milky Way. That's from the prose "The Sons of the Crab," and the planet Wrangel was located in the Crab Nebula. Was that an intentional reference? Because there's also the planet Yamato located in the Crab Nebula, which is from the comic K9's Finest Hour. So I wanted to know, was that just an in-universe nebula, or were you referencing a Doctor Who thing?
A little bit of both, if I'm honest. The Crab Nebula's quite well known outside of Doctor Who, but inside of Doctor Who, for probably not everybody, it's a nice little nod at certain little references. But you wanted somewhere that if you don't know what the Crab Nebula is in Doctor Who, you know it exists. So it was more of a mixture of nods for both
Right.
sides.
Exactly, because in the Quantum Archangel, the Crab Nebula is said to be created by the Usarians. And during in the Nightmare Fair, the Sixth Doctor said that a replica of Blackpool was being built on the rim of the Crab Nebula. So there's lots of fun little events and references to the Crab Nebula. But as the TARDIS Wiki notes, in the real world, the Crab Nebula is a supernova remnant in the Perseus arm of the Milky Way galaxy. However, in The Sons of the Crab, the first Doctor describes the nebula as outside of the Milky Way. However, there is currently no evidence cited on the wiki related to its in-location universe. So I just thought that was funny. Doctor Who is limited by the science of the day. I think back to Invasion of the Dinosaurs, where I think there's a dinosaur in that we've now discovered doesn't exist anymore, or that the Doctor should have known wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
So I think we'll consider the Crab Nebula to be in the right place for as far as your story is concerned. In the Worry, there is a reference to the Eye of Orion, which I appreciated. That was seen in the Five Doctors, as well as some extended universe settings, including Big Finish's Artist at the End of Time. That's a recent one that people will most likely have enjoyed. You also reference Florana, which Third Doctor once told Sarah Jane that he always came back from Florana feeling 100 years younger, which is a lovely expression that reminds us that the Doctor is so alien and so so much older than he necessarily looks. And so you also mention Blackpool, which we talked about with the Nightmare Fair, and also Saint Tropez, which I found some a couple of thin references in Doctor Who to Saint Tropez. Like, for instance, Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart said that End Space wasn't exactly Saint Tropez in The Ghost of End Space. But was there, because I love that as writers we're not only referencing other things, but sometimes we're throwing in our own little things to say, oh, the Doctor's been here, the Doctor's done this adventure, or maybe I'll write a short story about this one day. What was that the idea behind Saint Tropez, or am I missing a reference?
I think it was that or Chroma, one of the two, and I think Saint Tropez was the more exotic out of the two.
Brilliant, and you've got the pronunciation correct there. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, and we look up obviously in the setting of World War One. It's not the first time that the Doctor Who has gone into that setting. I mean, in the War Games, for instance, the Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe arrive on what looks to be World War One, and has World War One soldiers and such. But also we see that setting in Human Nature, The Family of Blood, and of course Twice Upon a Time, as well as in the extended universe of Doctor Who, most notably like Dark Eyes, stuff like that. Lots of comics. Was there, as I talked with the other Andrew who illustrated your story, I wanted, there was a lot of research that went into making sure that the outfits, the weaponry was accurate. Was that, as you came across that setting, was it something that you'd wanted to revisit? Was there a special attachment to episodes that had happened in there, or was it pitch? Was this the first pitch that you did for the story, or were you given kind of a brief like I was? Let me in on that. Creation.
It was the when I pitched the Worry, the idea behind it's a lot of my writing process is quite different from other people's. It usually starts with a story title, and in this case, when I was pitching ideas for the annual, we'd already decided on Shiver. We'd agreed on Shiver, and I had an idea for 3 different stories. 2 were quite well developed, and the other one was just the title. That was it. So when I handed over the pitch for the 3 stories, it was, which one, what do you sound like the sound of? They went with the Worry, and I thought, oh no, I haven't got a story for that. All I've got is a story title. Then it was, where can I go with the Worry? Now, the First World War and the Second World War are 2 areas which fascinate me, really. The hardships that mankind brought upon itself during both periods. And you look at the devastation right across what they did to mainland Europe and beyond during that time. And that's where the worry started to grow. And like I said, you've got the gas attacks during the First World War. They started developing chemical weapons, gas weapons. And way back in the 90s, I wrote a story called The Red Veil. And it was a story about a red mist that was created in a concentration camp during World War II and escaped. So that was a kind of starting point to build on. The next building block came from a Mr. Man story called Mr. Worry by Roger Hargreaves. If you're not familiar with Mr. Men, take a look. They're just little children's characters. And Mr. Worry always had a dark cloud over his head. And that was his worry. And that was the next point. And it was just fitting World War One in with this little cloud. And that's where the worry came from. It's
That's incredible.
quite a strange process that I've got.
That is so fascinating to me. I love that. I did start with I had pitched some ideas to Mark, the editor, and I was, he sent back, that's great, but I want to do a story all set within the TARDIS. And so I was like, okay, all set within the TARDIS. And we wanted to take inspiration from The Edge of Destruction because, we couldn't reference something like Journey to the Center of the TARDIS because it happened, after the annual is set. So I then got the title I was like, okay, so let's go, instead of The Edge of Destruction, let's do The Edge of Oblivion. And so I loved that, we both started with a title for our stories and then worked from there forwards. That's not I think that's, some people might write that way. I think a lot of people start with the story and then maybe the title's one of the last things.
I do know a lot of people who write the story and then they struggle to find a title for it. Right. I'm the opposite way. It's if I've got a list in my notebook, I've got a list of titles and I think, oh, that sounds good. Write it down. Haven't got an idea for the story, just got an idea. So that's where a lot of my story ideas come from, is to think of a good title, goes down, and that's the starting point.
Brilliant. What a fun way to start and think of, a story or to build a pitch from that. You mentioned earlier writing stories for short stories for your kids, and I love that. That's something that has a place near and dear to my heart because my dad also did that. He's a writer and he wrote short stories and probably over 100 children's stories that he's written and would read to us every week. And I think that really that and being read to at a young age, and eventually I found Doctor Who at 12. I think some people are like, it's the very first thing I ever remember is watching Doctor Who, and I'm like, I didn't have that early of a childhood growing up with Doctor Who, but being America, it's not too surprising. But I did enjoy and watch Doctor Who from a young age, but I think that a lot of those things I credit to hearing those stories read, and having a storyteller and creativity in the family is definitely something that I credit to making me want to write and be a writer. And so I just really appreciate that you do that as well, and you're continuing on that lovely tradition of storytelling.
Yeah, I've always encouraged my children to read. I've got 4 girls, and I've always encouraged them pick up a book, sit and read. And now 3 of them have gone on to have their own families, and I've told them, buy them books, read to them, sit and read, even if it's only for 10 minutes. It's just to bring in, because a book will open up a whole new world. There's no, whatever you watch on TV or movies, it's no match for what you can dream up in your own mind.
It is incredible. I mean, it happens so much in, some for me, it's always been like a movie playing out in your head. And I love the there's just something so personal too to have, a parent reading to their own child and taking these stories and maybe they want to listen to the same story read a million times over. But whatever it is, I think it is so important for firing the imagination, but also I think gives you builds empathy, and that's what I love about
Yeah.
settings
Yes.
like Doctor Who, or fantasy. A lot some people have this idea that if it's not nonfiction, then it's not worth reading. Why would you read fiction? And I don't understand that point at all, because to me, fiction allows us to break down barriers, and to have empathy for people who we wouldn't otherwise have empathy for, or to be able to see points of view
Yeah.
because they're couched in in fantasy, in the fantastic, in the alien. And I absolutely love that. I mean, some things we see in Doctor Who where the companions have these learning moments where the humans are being treated terribly by the aliens, and the doctor goes, well, what's so bad about it? You humans treat animals this way. And the
Yes.
companions are like, but it's different when it's us. And so I definitely feel like it can give that sense of empathy, just by reading fantasy.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And even you look at stories like Galaxy 4, where the monster is actually a the good guy,
Right.
and it's the Dravins who are aesthetically pleasing are the villains. So it's a nice switch on a theme that you would expect would be the other way round.
Right, right. And the this idea everywhere. I mean, at the end of the day, Doctor Who is kind of limited by its format of needing a cliffhanger and such. But there are lots of stories where the Doctor's like, I want to do this a different way. Like with the Silurians, we need to do this a different way, but either the humans mess it up, or the aliens end up being monsters anyway. But I love those stories, and the fact that the Doctor still sees them for who they are. And
Yes.
that's just something that I think is really special about Doctor Who. You mentioned the fact that he's not a typical archetype of a hero who punches their way through things. We have different eras of the Doctor being more or less violent, or having to use violence anyway. And I thought that's what's kind of interesting about the unit setting and the stories that clearly you're such an expert on. But what I liked about Unit was that it allowed the Doctor to take less of a actively violent role and sort of be disapproving of the violence that the brigadier or other unit folks used, because in future stories when it's just the Doctor and a companion and they're being attacked by a monster, there's defense, there's outwitting. It's more understandable that you would have to run into situations where force is a defense mechanism. And so I think I
Yes.
liked that
Yes.
in Unit the Doctor could take a little bit more of a back seat and be more of the trying to find a different way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, that was one of the interesting things about Sard, is Sard was an ice warrior. He's big, powerful. He's got sonic gun, and it takes the Doctor out of that. I've got to be violent. Um, I've this is a way I've got to do. I've got to try and think on my feet, use my mind instead of trying to use violence. And it was a way to take him out of a potentially violent setting, having Sard there, but
Right.
also trying to find a way not to have Sard just going in and just blasting everything, as
Yes.
an ice warrior probably might have done.
Right, right. And there's certain things that, like the sonic screwdriver or the TARDIS, they're they're these incredible pieces of tech, but it can become this this sort of reason of like, okay, so you're landing in a time machine, something's gone wrong. Why don't you immediately get back, find out what date things went wrong, hop back into the TARDIS, fly back in time, fix the situation. And so I think that's why, in many settings, they get separated from the TARDIS immediately,
Yes.
or the sonic screwdriver isn't going to get me out of this one because it's a wooden door, like these different
Yeah.
reasons that you have to write out because or like something like K9, scene depends on the showrunner and the writer though, because clearly some showrunners loved K9 and having him around, and then John Nathan Turner was like, nope, you're we're gonna behead
Yeah.
K9, we're gonna throw you into the ocean, we're gonna
Yes. Every chance he got, he'd done something to that poor little dog,
or
which I
K9.
see on the shelf behind you as well. Your
Yes,
K9.
yes. It's this lovely. I got it while I was in the UK, from Pam's Happy Hats at a
Yes, I've
convention.
got. Can I? Yeah. There you go.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing!
Yeah.
Brilliant! Oh my gosh!
Along with.
Oh, that's amazing! Because I also got. I have Adric
I have the
as well.
Doctor.
Oh, and Rose. Oh my goodness. This is amazing. This is amazing. We'll link to Pam's Happy Hats as well if you want to get your own. I mean, I love that. Got to get those at a convention, London Film and Comic Con 2023. So yeah, it was amazing. I recently was in the UK. I've got a vlog coming out about it. I'm currently editing it, but I got to go to Manchester. So I felt very very satisfied because other stories set in the UK prior to my trip, I couldn't like relate to like the setting. There's a Manchester in the US. There's lots of Manchesters in the US, but like there, to be able to say I've been there and I know what the city looks like, and all this stuff. It was very special to be able to point out that
Yeah.
setting.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, of course, where Shiver was set.
Right, right.
Manchester. Yeah.
And so I loved that setting for the story, and seeing that, and I felt it was kind of ironic that there's a story set in New York, and that wasn't written by either of the two Americans that worked on the annual. There was myself and the artist who illustrated my story. So that was quite fun. It was Manhattan Transference,
Yes.
by Paul Burns, and also illustrated by Andrew Parsons, and Richard Jones. So yeah, it was really fun to be able to relate on that setting. If you could come up, like, do you have any sort of titles that you could share with us, that are kind of ideas for yourself? If you want to keep them to yourself, I understand that too. We can make up some new ones as well. But I just love to hear some titles that you've got going
Okay.
that could maybe
Well,
be stories down the
at the
line.
moment on YouTube, there's a YouTube channel called Roger's Readings. And towards the end of last year, they started releasing a 7-part story that I got to write specifically for the 60th anniversary.
What?
That's called Father Time. It features all 13 doctors, 11 companions, and a host of monsters. And it was a challenge to write.
Oh my goodness. This is
It
reminding
was
me
a
of
massive
prison.
challenge getting all 13 doctors to interact with each other, but it was great. But that's currently going out on YouTube. I think the part 5 just went out a couple of weeks ago, and the gentleman who narrates it, he's working on part 6 now.
That's
Um,
incredible.
so that's out. That was a challenge to write.
So, I mean, that's like Prisoners of Time level, challenge, to have all these doctors in one place. But I love that you rose to the challenge, because that's all I wanted for the 50th, the 60th, just continuing that tradition of, set up in the 3 doctors. And it felt like that was the only anniversary story that achieved that fully, because, obviously in the 5 doctors we had Richard Hurdnall and Tom Baker couldn't make it, but they still, made that effort. So what was that like, trying to make room for 13 doctors and 11 companions, and that's kind of just an organizational, challenge as well.
It was very difficult. Um, once again, it started with the title, Father Time, and it went from there. And one of the biggest things I've always wanted to do is a cliffhanger. Always wanted to do a cliffhanger. And I thought from the very beginning it will be a 7-part story. And then it's working out what the ending of each episode would be. Once I got the ending of episode 1, I worked from the beginning to that ending. So each episode, I started at the back end and then went to the beginning. So as soon as I knew there's one episode that's something really big. Not going to spoil it for anybody. And I was so excited to write to this part, done it. And then I thought, right, how am I going to get to that? That was a challenge getting to it. But inside the story, there's lots of little mini stories as it builds up. So you'll see the 10th Doctor and Rose with a Dalek. You'll see the 11th Doctor with Ice Warriors. And so it goes along with that. 13th was with Missy, the 2nd Doctor with a Yeti. So all these little mini stories are folded into one big one. So eventually, at some point down the line, I'd like to actually write these little. I've got the Tom Baker segment is called Junk, and it's Tom Baker with Leela and K9, and they're on a cruiser with Crotons. Now, I love the Crotons. I'm not ashamed to say I love the Crotons, and I would pitch Russell T Davies to come and get me, and I can write a Croton story. That's how much I love the Crotons.
Are you hearing this, Russell? We need this.
I would also like to write one of the stories I've would love to write is called Sunflower. And that's basically Meglos versus a Crinoid.
Oh my gosh. I need this matchup now.
Yeah, that's where that one's heading. Some of the other titles I've got, I'm working on a story at the moment with Andrew Parsons called Heart of Silver. So that'll be something to look out for. Other title stories I've got is Passengers, Hitler's Cat. That's fun. Shifting Sands, Doctor Who and the Mole Men. That's very much a William Hartnell story. Wow. So it's just finding outlets to write these stories and get them out there.
I mean, that's so cool. And as you talked about your writing process, it really feels like you begin with the end in mind. And that's it's sort of like when you're I think of the example of how to plow a straight line in a field. If you just look straight down, it's going to go all over the place. But if you're looking at a single point off in the distance in the horizon, it's a straight line. And so beginning with the end in mind, I see that in your process and working backwards from there to the cliffhanger. That's amazing. I appreciate that, because I totally, I knew where I was beginning and I followed that, and then I did it. I came to the end of my story and I was like, how do I solve this? Like you said, you got to the cliffhanger, knew where that was supposed to go, but then I was like, how am I going to solve this? And it just so happened with some pacing around and playing around with ideas, it just so happened that something I had written at the beginning ended up being the solution, and I hadn't even realized it at the time that I'd written it. So that, I absolutely love that advice, to begin with the end in mind. Well, as we come to the end of our interview, which is a shame because I've really enjoyed talking with you, and I love just, as Doctor Who fans, we have so much of a shared, reference points that it feels effortless to talk with these wonderful guests that I get to interview. And I want to say thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, and thank you for sharing your Thank you for sharing your creative journey and your story as a Doctor Who fan. Um, I want to just have you reiterate where people can find you on social media, and your website will, of course, link to Father Time and things like that. But you're on, let's see, Facebook, Instagram. Those will all be linked
I have two Facebook accounts. I have Instagram. I'm hoping
And
to get my Amazon shop
right,
up and running for my non-Doctor Who novels.
right.
And then
Tell us a little bit about your non-Doctor Who novels as well.
okay, like I've released 5 novels. The first one, it was quite a few years ago now, called Rain, and that's basically a mining colony where it's been pulled apart by political intrigue, a creature waking up under the planet's surface, and every time it rains acid. So that's that one. My second novel was a children's story about bullying, which was quite close to me. This is School for Apes, and it's basically about a young boy called Dominic Atwell, who was a bully. He was expelled from a school and he was sent to a special school. But when he got to the special school, he discovered all the other pupils were either an ape or a monkey. And because he was no longer the biggest or the fastest or he was the one being bullied. And it's his story about how he comes to terms with what he was and realize that bullying isn't right. So that was that one. Then I released Deadfall, which is quite a dark dystopian thriller. It's a place where Deadfall is a place where if your loved ones are ill, you would pay them money to keep them in cryogenic suspension until a cure is made. But in reality, they're slowly dissolving them from the feet upwards and selling their waste matter for cheap food for the poor.
Wow.
So that's Deadfall. Then I released Fire and Ice, which is about a planet that's breaking up, and the struggles of the colony that's on the planet. And I released a book last year called The Calling, which is about King Arthur if he was alive today. Excalibur's waking up and it's calling to the last in his bloodline. So they're the 5 books that I've released. I am working in between the Doctor Who stuff on a 6th called The Firemaker. And so I'm hoping that will come out in the next year or so.
That's so cool. It's not about
No, it's not
the
about
cavemen
No,
in the first episode of Doctor Who.
no, but that's where the title did come from.
Amazing, amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that and for joining me today. It's been lovely.
Thank you. It's been nice talking to you. I've enjoyed it.